right. Hello, and welcome to today's special virtual event where we'll learn why every federal AI demands an AI factory. I'm your host, Shay Connolly with GovExec. Before we get started, let's review some housekeeping. This recording will be made available on demand following the live broadcast. You can rewatch or share with your colleagues who aren't able to join us this afternoon. And we want to hear from you during today's session. Sound off in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. Our speakers will be available for Q&A following our discussion, so drop your questions in the Q&A section. We are here live and we would love your questions. And we also have some questions for you, so please be sure to answer the polls throughout the broadcast. Finally, visit our resource hub on the broadcast website for more information from FormAssembly. And let's get started. Joining me for this discussion today are two experts from FormAssembly. I'm pleased to welcome Daniel Petrie, Partner Account Executive for the DoD, and Josh Straley, Senior Product Marketing Manager. Thank you both for joining me. And before we dive into our conversation, would you each please share a little bit about yourselves and your roles with FormAssembly? Daniel, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. My name is Daniel Petrie, primary account manager handling the Department of Defense in the federal government space for FormAssembly. Background, West Point, military based, been involved in the DOT side of the equation now for upwards of about 20 years. I'm really looking forward to talking about this new requirement on CMMC, and hopefully we can answer all your questions.
Yeah. My name is Josh Straley, Senior Product Marketing Manager here at FormAssembly. I've been with FormAssembly for just shy of 4 years. And most of my work, candidly, is in the private sector, where we've been helping organizations across healthcare, financial services, regulated industries collect and manage data and automate processes. Just recently, FormAssembly partnered with FedHive to move our product and make it available in a FedRAMP high environment, as well as a DoD IL4 environment. So I'm really excited to bring some of those private sector success stories around data quality improvement, data process improvement to the public sector. So I lack, candidly, Dan's bona fides. I live near Wright Pat Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, so I'm familiar with contractors and public sector agencies, but haven't worked there. But I'm really excited with the solutions that we're going to be able to bring to the public sector space, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Great. Thank you both for introducing yourselves. So we can jump right into questions now. I think we all know CMMC full rollout is here. What are you hearing from defense industrial base organizations about where their data collection processes are falling short? And why is this such a high stakes gap right
now? Great question. I'll take that. So for those of us who don't know, what is CMMC? It's not just another acronym. CMMC is basically cybersecurity model certification. It's was announced as a requirement, I think, this past November. Really comes into full force here shortly. And now with CMC entering the enforceable rollout period, defense contractors really need to realize that its business, its biggest compliance exposure is not always inside the system of record as it has been in the past. CMMC really turns cybersecurity into a contract eligibility issue at the point of collection. And that's where FormAssembly really excels. Sensitive data is still entering organizations through such things as email, spreadsheets, PDFs, a number of unsecured forms, manual supplier workflows before it ever reaches a controlled environment. And CMMC really addresses that and makes that part of the entire security structure going forward. That creates some gaps in access control, really in the capability for audits, definitely encryption, routing, retention, and definitely proof of compliance. And really, this is a high stakes environment because CMMC is becoming a strict condition of contract eligibility across the entire defense supply chain. And then you get involved with the fact that any contractor that deals with a DoD has got to be FedRAMP high. With FormAssembly, we have that, plus we're IL4 authorized. and that contractors really need to show that they can protect data, not just after it's stored, but really from the moment of its collection, its inception, that entry point that I just talked about. FormAssembly is really positioned to help close that gap by, like I said, providing FedRAMP high, secure data collection and workflow layer that really connects the intake, approvals, any kind of evidence capture, and system of record deliverability without forcing teams back into that manual, risky workaround that so many companies currently have. So the bottom line here is that CMMC is turning data collection from an operational convenience really into a compliance control point. And really, that's the opening point. So you need to make sure that you have all those elements of CMMC in place before you get into a contract negotiation. Because if you don't have that um, defined, you're going to run into issues as far as getting a contract approved.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, it appears to me, and admittedly, it's an uneducated opinion, but it looks like the federal government is really, dangling the contracts out there with this rollout, and making sure that vendors and contractors in the space that are working with the federal government are paying attention to this requirement by making contract eligibility. Especially, I think the next deadline is this November, 2026, for phase 2, and then more contracts become eligible and under the CMMC requirements. So it seems like they're taking the money approach, right? They're dangling that over. What we're seeing from the FormAssembly perspective is a lot more organizations, including vendors, but also the public sector agencies themselves are taking a look at data. And we'll talk more about the data as a national asset later, but they're taking a look at data and their data processes and realizing that not all of it is happening inside of their systems of record, inside of the tools that they already made sure were compliant. They've contracted with Microsoft for GovCloud. They've contracted with Salesforce for their GovCloud instances. They know that their systems of record are safe, but what they're not realizing and what they're finding as a part of this audit process, which is unfortunately when most bad discoveries are discovered, is that their intake processes are hanging out there. And they're hanging out in, as Dan mentioned, manual processes that are just inefficient and costing their teams time and bogging down their projects. But then worse, they're in this layer of what we call shadow IT, where they have people spinning up forms inside of non-compliant software tools, digital web forms, contact us forms, or more complex forms. And they're collecting data in something that is not under governance, is not under compliance. And, they're discovering that now, which is a good thing as they look at the CMMC rollout. But what they are struggling with is a lot of the solutions to data capture that have been out there and been available at the FedRAMP high level or any of these compliant tools, they take months and months to spin up an implementation. I mean, you're looking at tools that usually require consultation, require solution implementation teams. That requires a project plan, and all of a sudden you've got a 6-month rollout before you're even able to replace the manual processes, replace the uncompliant software that you're seeing. So, as a lot of vendors enter, their C3PAO audits, that's when they're discovering this, and there's a little bit of panic there because they are being oversold on, compliant, maybe business process management software that's going to be more expensive, that they don't have the budget for, they don't have the timeline for, and so that's kind of what we're seeing as a result of this. Good vendors have started looking at this ahead of time, but a lot of organizations are deadline driven. I think, as we all always know, that's not just public sector, it's private sector as well. And they're definitely discovering some gaps, as Dan mentioned, this year.
Yeah, and Josh, the phrase compliance friction, that gets used a lot, but what does it actually look like in practice for an IT leader who's trying to keep workflows moving without cutting corners on security?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways I look at compliance friction. There is, the thing that the burden that these organizations and the government put on ourselves, right? There's this idea that hey, we need to hold ourselves to a high level. So there's this friction when you are going through a procurement process. You have your security teams requesting documentation, and even that is a slow process for a lot of procurement, software procurement, tool procurement. But where I see the struggle, I think that most focuses or most is most relevant to CMMC is when an organization, be it an agency, be it a contractor, has decided on a tool and a new process. Rolling that out, especially with a larger agency with like a larger purview, that's where the friction is the strongest or the roughest. I've forgotten my physics terms for friction, but that's when the pushback is the hardest and felt the most, because you have a CISO office that is, has a tool, has done a lot of due diligence, feels like this tool, one, is compliant, but two, is going to work for all of the use cases at this agency, at this organization, and it's going to replace all of the shadow IT layer, a bunch of tools that we don't need anymore. We're going to see cost savings from that. Hey, organization, adopt this. Here is your SOP for this. Here's your timeline, your own deadlines, et cetera. What we find with data intake processes in particular, and data collection tools in particular, is they become muscle memory for a lot of teams. If you're thinking healthcare, it's like, hey, I've got a patient intake form. This is my patient intake form. It's the same paper form we used since the 50s. This is how we do this, right? And it's like, well, hold on. We need that paper form to suddenly become the beginning of a process that lives inside of Salesforce, that kicks off several digitally automated processes inside of a software ecosystem that, say, your average, medical tech doesn't necessarily have any visibility into. And it's like, why do I have to replace this form? This form is the only thing I've ever known. So that's where the friction we have seen with teams be felt the most, because it's what slows down these implementation timelines. And these timelines are set to make sure the organization, the agency, the vendor meets compliance deadlines, of which there's money on the line, there's fines on the line. And if you see that timeline slow down, you're really putting the organizational goals at risk. So that's where I see the most compliance friction, is really the rollout of compliance processes. It's just tough.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, would you like to add anything here?
Definitely. Great point, Josh. I kind of, in listening to Josh, I wanted to identify perhaps a specific use case. We had a major city on the East Coast that had a program for years that was a program permitting use case. It was entirely manual. It was PDFs. It was registration docs. And what they needed was a client facing forms and better processes that were compliant, especially in the security environment that we're all living into today. That's even going to get more stringent. And so they recognized this, and they found that often the compliant platforms that they really weren't the most user friendly, to say the least. But FormAssembly offered a modern user experience, both for builders and end users, so they could create the compliant and secure formats, the workflows that they needed internally, but also it made it easier for their clients, which were the citizens of that specific town. And I guess in summary, um, the compliance doesn't have to limit user friendliness. And in fact, in today's world, we can make user friendliness far more compliant than it ever has been in the past. And when cities are looking, and even within the Department of Defense or the federal government, when they're looking for platforms they can trust, when you look at FormAssembly, our FedRAMP high, our DoD IL4 environment really makes it easier for them, and especially when we're talking about CMMC becoming a primary issue from a contract capability, here in the near future.
Yeah, Daniel, since you brought up FedRAMP High, DoD IL4, can you break that down a little bit more and what that means in plain terms for someone as they're evaluating vendors for a CUI workflow today?
Oh, great question. So FedRAMP High has been mandated by the Department of Defense um, to not only for federal agencies, but for to meet and exceed the needs of all data. At the formal definition, more data at any level of government, state, local, the collection and of data and whatnot for cybersecurity functionalities. Um, so FedRAMP High really is one element that FormAssembly has. I look at it kind of a three-legged stool. FedRAMP High is mandatory within the Department of Defense and the federal government. It's also viewed from the state and local side of the equation as really the top line requirement for cybersecurity. And the DoD IL4 is just another layer of security requirements for the Department of Defense. So it's simply, to put it right, simply, is that if you are not FedRAMP High, if you're not dealing with a contractor that is not only CMMC qualified but FedRAMP and IL4 qualified, you're really exposing the entity that you're trying to sell to. And nowadays, it's going to come to a point where, like I said, the contract viability is going to be limited if you do not have that capability. So, to summarize, FedRAMP High is a requirement. It's a security requirement. When it's matched with IL4, you really have the first level of cybersecurity that the federal government, especially the DoD, is looking for.
Yeah, I heard Dan say functionality, which to me is always a sign that it's if you hear that word, it's not exactly plain English. So, my understanding, especially with FedRAMP and DoD IL4, is there is a software and an environment component of security controls that we again partnered with our partners at FedHive to offer FormAssembly inside of their FedRAMP High and DoD IL4 environments. So that's where those software security controls come in. But then, like CMMC, there are audits that are about how an organization, a software organization like FormAssembly, or in the case of CMMC, how a contracting or vendor handles data, whether that be inside of a digital environment or outside of it. And so, we watch our security team here at FormAssembly. I don't want to say jump through hoops because obviously it's very important, but go through long audit cycles where, every part of our platform, from the security of the software itself to the security understanding of our employees, is tested, audited, and approved through CP3AO audits, and I think actually several more audits implemented, both from our own self-attestation, from our own self-approval, and then also third party and our partners at FedHive. So it's very robust. And to Dan's point, like the federal government holds that as the standard for data collection, so much so that they apply it to controlled unclassified information. They trust warfighter health information to platforms that support or fall under FedRAMP High environments. So we take that very seriously here at FormAssembly. Our mission for the last 20 years has been about enabling agencies, organizations to be better stewards of the data that they collect, because there's a person at the other end of the line so often. While we're happy to be able to offer these compliances at the federal level, we also have solutions for state and local governments. We've been working at the SLED level for a long time, a lot of proven use cases. So I do want to say, if there's any state and local executives on the call, and you're like, yes, I do want a platform that's aligned with these federal requirements, but I don't necessarily need that at my level. We do have, software solutions for you, because I think I mentioned this earlier, but every level of government needs something to help drive efficiency. Your budgets are tight. I know that staffing is tight. I think GovExec has been doing some great series on, staffing, especially in the last couple of years. And it's something that's on everybody's mind, is how do I make my team more efficient without sacrificing the services that I offer my given constituents, whether that be a city, whether that be warfighters, whether that be, survey audiences for HHS. I think, the plain message, again, I'm doing my thing where I'm getting away from plain English, is with FedRAMP High certification, you can rely on the tools that you find in the FedRAMP marketplace to meet your requirements, support things like CMMC, make sure that your own processes are compliant. And as Dan mentioned earlier, it doesn't have to be super hard to do so. It can be a more usable system.
That's a great point, Josh. If I can add to what Josh is saying here, real quick, from
Yeah.
a SLED standpoint, one of the things that we can offer any SLED executives that are on this call is, of course, a very comprehensive security packet, which some states have their own security requirements. Texas might have FedRAMP, but most states understand that FedRAMP High is really kind of the gold standard, combined with IL4. But if you have additional questions related to our stance, we've got some really good security packet information that we can provide you.
Great, thank you. And as Josh, you mentioned, of course, budget always top of mind for government leaders. So folks listening today, they may be thinking, we've already invested pretty heavily in systems like Salesforce or other platforms. So how can secure data collection fit into an existing ecosystem rather than just adding another silo, another budget item, another inefficiency?
Yes, and I'm glad this will give me an opportunity to tackle some of the trends that I see in 2026, because I've been in software for the better part of a decade. Never has it moved faster than the last year or so, and I think everybody, unless you've been living under a rock, and I don't know how you would have tuned into a webinar if you had been, have seen that speed. The thing is that and it's not just the public sector, like every organization of a certain size needs to have systems that they adopt that they can rely on and that don't change super quickly. And that does mean that some organizations adopt a system of record. We do a lot of work with higher ed. I'm thinking higher ed here. And they find that it works and it stores student data. But then as the years progress, they become so reliant on that single system, they start building automation inside of that. Perhaps, like they're able to send notifications out of it, trigger automations inside of it, but, data input, has this follow-up action, et cetera. And they start to realize that those systems of record are where everything is happening. And as they try to modernize the organization, as they try to bring new processes on, do anything new, they'll usually find that this infrastructure, like real physical infrastructure, isn't as flexible as they need it to be. And they start to realize that it's actually blocking some of the things that they need to do. Suddenly they can't get a process that speaks to another system, and integration is not as reliable. It's not as open of an integration as they need. And things just start to, as you said, get siloed, stuck. The data gets stuck in a system and it's not accessible. Usually you go out, you identify that, you do a Google search, and you're like, oh, well, looks like I have to buy something to fix that. But that just exacerbates the problem when you start layering software on top of software on top of software. And as a software organization, of course, like we recognize that we're always asking people to buy us to solve their problem. But the way that we think about FormAssembly and the value that we offer is that we form a connective tissue between not just your system of record, but every other piece of your software stack. And we make it really easy for anyone on your team, be that an IT manager, someone who's very tech savvy, someone who's very technical, down to, and I'm a marketer, so I can say this, down to maybe your marketing team who might not be as tech savvy, or as I mentioned earlier, a medical tech. If someone at your organization or agency needs to be able to collect data, they need a tool that helps them do that helps them get their job done. And you, perhaps as an executive, want to make sure that data gets where it needs to go, so that you have the analysis, the reporting capabilities, but you don't want to slow it down. So like when you start to see your system of record become a sticking point, where we see people solving that problem is by bringing on this kind of this data layer over the system of record and over your entire tech stack. Not every tool can do that. We're proud to say that FormAssembly is robust enough to handle the very simple use cases, a contact us form on your website, all the way to the tens of pages of surveys, right? A survey that is multiple pages long, 10, we're talking hundreds of questions. We can handle every type of data collection surface that your organization might need. And that brings a consistent tool, again, a compliant tool, as we've talked about earlier, that your organization can roll out across the entire organization and reduce some of that friction, because a lot of that friction that I talked about earlier comes when tools just aren't capable of replacing the process that they're supposed to replace. If you get a capable tool, and we believe FormAssembly is one of those things, it allows you to unsilo data. It allows you to pipe it to where it needs to go if you need to build in redundant processes. And again, it's compliant to your entire tech stack, and your data processes remain compliant. So that's where I have seen people, have some success. I should say, yes, it is another piece of software. Yes, budgets are tight. So that is a difficult conversation. Where I have seen with FormAssembly is we often replace a lot of single point solutions. Again, some shadow IT, but maybe also you might have some process automation software that you just don't need and that wasn't moving as fast as you need it to. I find that we can usually replace and be a better fit in some budgets. And if you have pricing concerns, I encourage you to reach out to FormAssembly, because I think we have a very valuable product, especially for the public sector.
Daniel, anything you wanted to add in here?
Well, I think we also want to talk about, data is really a national asset, and I know that's might be stealing your question a little bit, but from the standpoint of being top of mind for a lot of attendees, and it brings to mind what Josh is saying. It brings to mind a specific case that I recently ran into, especially within the U.S. Army. Within most of the Army posts, there is a clinic. There's usually a medical clinic of one form or another. And I was recently, I guess, let me back up a little bit, that the commanders of those clinics are really focused on providing the best quality service to their clients, their customers, and may not see the underlying aspects of the administration and the infrastructure and operational processes that bring that customer to them, that troop to them. And so they may not realize that the processes and the inefficiencies that their staff run into and what they're dealing with. And this specific case it was kind of interesting, because here I was talking to a commander of a southern military base, and we were talking about basically the aspect of data and how it needs to be secure. And he really didn't have an appreciation other than, I get the customer, I get my troops in here, I'm able to look at their records and provide the service. Well, luckily for both of us, there was a senior nurse that was in on that call in that room, and obviously protecting the data was a key portion of that directive. But really kind of improving that data and making sure it's complete is really important. And this particular senior nurse, and I quote, said, "Colonel, you don't see the problems we have because we don't pass this onto you, but we really handle chaos on a daily basis." And that's exactly her exact words. And basically, she was saying that the information isn't complete most of the time or correct. And so we have to go back and we have to work with that customer to make sure that the information that we're going to be providing to you is accurate, up to date, and gives you a proper picture. So you don't see that. So essentially what that kind of revealed to that colonel was, it was an eye opener. And his statement back to me was basically, I'm the stakeholder for it, but I didn't realize we had these issues, from a base infrastructure point. So yes, the proper manipulation of data to make sure it's correct is of really prime importance. But if my staff is having to spend extra time and effort and away from their primary focus That's important to me going forward.
Yeah. Josh, did you have anything to add about what agencies might be wanting to do right now so they're not kind of scrambling when this directive deadline hits?
Yeah. Well, I think Dan kind of like outlined it there. I think I don't want to say that it's okay. I'll say that executives often have this. Call it a privileged viewpoint. And I don't mean that they're like I don't mean privileged in a way that they're missing out necessarily on the hard truth. I mean that they have this very high level view of an organization, often through a system of record, where it's like, hey, we get all our data in here. This is the source of truth. We establish that. This is the visibility that we want to see. This is everything that our organization, our agency is collecting. This is our results. Right? This is where I'm going to report out to my superiors. This is where I'm going to draw, conclusions from, and I trust this data. And if you have a system of record that is not working for the processes at your organization and for the people that are actually out there, sourcing that data, whether that be, in Dan's example, a medical, a nurse, a medical technician, or if it's a person themselves kind of submitting information through a form and the form is clunky and broken and looks like a government website from maybe the 2010s. I admit we've come a long way in the last decade. Then you're actually not seeing everything that you need to see. You're not seeing the chaos that people are dealing with when they're trying to get medical data in from patients inside perhaps, a field clinic that might be seeing some wild stuff. That privileged, viewpoint might be limited. And so, my point would be, if you're looking at whether it be CMMC or the directive for, treating data as a national asset, I think what you need to do is exactly what Dan kind of just described. I think going to your stakeholders, and that could look like the front lines, so to speak. It could be, your nurses, whoever is bringing important data in. It could be your surveying team. It could be your CRM team. I would go to them and I would start a conversation about, hey, what does our data footing look like currently? What are the processes that your team is spending the most time on? Elon's Doge had that process where it's like, hey, email me at the end of every week 3 to 5 things that you completed. Maybe the request is, hey, not wondering what you're doing so much, but like, where are you getting bogged down? Have an open conversation with your stakeholders. Like, hey, what is inefficient here? Where are you worried about compliance? Because again, as an executive, I might be looking down at my tech stack and saying, hey, we made the right purchases. We are compliant. But then an audit might come through and it's like, hey, why is this team using this tool? I didn't even know about that. I would start the conversation at your organization with the stakeholders that you have access to, ask them to take a look at data processes and look at that through a wide lens and start gathering that information. I think that will give you a much firmer operational footing to act from and see if you even have gaps. And if you do, you'll identify them, and then you'll be able to start looking for a solution to fill those gaps.
Very true. Very true.
That's great. And so in just a moment, we'll be jumping to some follow-up questions. So I just want to remind folks, please feel free to drop any questions you may have in the Q&A box. But before we get there, I would like to hear a little bit from both of you on sort of some actionable steps that people can take now. Josh, I think you were just touching on some at the end of your comments just now, but if someone's watching today and they're still relying on email attachments or PDFs or unsecured web forms to collect sensitive data, what is the single most important first step that they could take this week?
Well, I think it is. It is starting that information gathering process. I encourage everyone, especially if you're an executive on the call, I encourage you to start digging a bit. Again, it shouldn't be you doing the investigation. You probably have a security team, an IT team that is in charge of this. But I think what you need to do is start digging, start asking the questions, and I think take a wide lens approach to what you would define as data collection. Because I think where I see the most success with any solution that we've helped implement, it's when an organization realizes that, hey, I am out there doing a lot of different things that I think of as different projects, and actually they're all data. They're all triggered from a point of intake, and they're all kicking off processes, and they're all in different formats, different files. To your point, I've got emails coming in, I've got PDFs that somebody is typing in. Maybe we've got an intern, maybe we've got a private, depending on your organization. But I've got people spending time on these processes, and I don't have control or the visibility that I need. So, that's my encourage. The thing is, kind of broaden your definition of data collection, because it can look like a lot of different things. And when you start to look at data as, almost like a circulatory system through your organization, you might start to see, not to be too dark, where you're bleeding, or where you've got, maybe a scab that you need to put a Band-Aid on. There's a better, hopefully a little bit better analogy there. But I'd encourage you to take a look at data processes in your organization, because that's going to help you with CMMC. That's where, a lot of that compliance framework is focused, is how you're handling data, and then data as a national directive. Both of those things, I think a lot of people look at data as ones and zeros. Data is the information that are coming from people so often. So I'd encourage you to just broaden that definition and then take a look at your processes. Sounds like a complicated step. I'd encourage you to ask questions. There we go. That's the first question, or the first step is, hey, start asking that question. Hey, what are our data processes?
Absolutely. Daniel, did you have anything to add for your first steps here? I think we can all kind of relate to that fire hose of information that we feel these days.
Yeah, I can't add much to what Josh just said, because it's dead on accurate. I think if anything, beyond what the new requirements are coming down the road or currently existing, is just get your stakeholders involved in the discussion. Just find out where those possible roadblocks are, and I it harkens back to the conversation I had with that health clinic at the base. Once that commander got the stakeholders, the people that are actually the front lines of the data, he realized, I've got to find out more. I got to find out what's slowing them down. So if I leave you with anything today, as well as what Josh said, is just get your stakeholders involved. Ask a couple questions. What's happening? Where do you guys need, where do you see improvement? How can we make our operations more efficient under the auspices of the new security arrangements?
Fantastic. Well, we have covered a lot of ground so far. We are going to keep going a little with a few questions we have here. And please feel free to submit any additional questions you may have as we finish up here. So to start with, do you have an ATO, or are you on someone else's paper?
Josh, you want to handle that one?
Sure. I think I mentioned it a couple of times, but we are partnered with FedHive, who offer a high-impact virtualized environment with multiple services available. So the FormAssembly product is available in that virtualized environment, and we are able to operate both with basically FedHive's ATO inside of their environment, and FormAssembly is available for FedRAMP High applications and DoD IL4 applications. So to answer the question, if you were to go to the FedRAMP marketplace, you would actually look up FedHive. You'd see FormAssembly available in their environment.
Great. So next question. We've been collecting data the same way for 15 years, spreadsheets, shared drives, email, and it works well enough. What is the cost of doing nothing as CMMC rollout continues?
I can take that. Well, when you look at the fact that the CMMC proposed in this last November, and now a hard active in November this year, if you do not have those initial security requirements taken care of, your contract eligibility is going to be nil. And then you add in the aspect that the DoD is now requiring that any vendors that they're doing business with have FedRAMP Hive. You put those two together, along with, IL4, 5, or 6 requirements. And if you want to do contract business with the federal government or Department of Defense, those are elements that you've got to have in place. And we can support you in that, because we do have that authorization and those criteria taken care of.
Great. And I think our final one here is one that a lot of folks can probably relate to. Our biggest vulnerability is still the end user, like a contractor who bypasses the secure form and just emails a spreadsheet. How do you close that gap?
Let me take that one because I think it refers to the integration friction I was talking about earlier. It can be difficult to get staff to, the scary way to describe it is to be compliant, but really it's just, the standard operating procedures and the tools you give them. It can be difficult, especially if they have muscle memory from 15 years of, data collection in a different system. Where I have seen success, or where I see, especially our customers have success, is making it drop dead simple for them to use a tool, for them to clearly know that the tool is the approved one, that it is compliant, that it has guardrails built in. That's where we see a lot of people seeing value in FormAssembly is, hey, we make it easy for you to build form templates that have a certain compliance language built in. You can audit access to sensitive data inside of our platform. You can purge data. So it's giving your teams tools that allow them to work the way they want to work. They need to be simple. They shouldn't bog them down and make them less efficient. They should be compliant while also extremely usable. And for a long time, I don't think we've had those options, especially in the FedRAMP marketplace. I think that's what's so exciting for me entering this space with FormAssembly is that I think we are a tool that has been needed, something that is robust, but easy to use, fast to implement, doesn't slow teams down while also operating in compliant environments. So that would be my suggestion, not to oversell FormAssembly. I mean, obviously, that's what I'm here to do. But just to be really clear with people, if you can make things super simple, super easy for your teams, and make those super simple, super easy processes, the processes that are compliant. Make sure they're reviewed, make sure they're approved, and then just say, hey, this is actually easier than going around the tool that I'm trying to roll out for you. I think that'll help. And that last question, I wanted to chime in. If you have those processes that have been running for 15 years, my read on CMMC is not that they're immediately out of compliance, but you got to take a look at them. You got to take a look at your tools because you will have contracts on the line. So you might have a manual process that is compliant, but you also might have an opportunity here because of CMMC to take a look at those processes and make them better, optimize them, actually unlock some of that efficiency that you see the private sector unlocking. I think this is an opportunity more than a deadline.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think simplified compliance probably sounds good to a lot of people right now. So.
That's true.
Yes, Shay. I know we had another question that about DoD Safe, and I don't have the information on like how that change is going to impact. We don't have a direct integration with DoD Safe. We do make it super simple to upload files through FormAssembly to like Salesforce GovCloud, but not DoD Safe on its own. But I'll commit to our audience member who has that question. I'm happy to get more information and I'll follow up via email.
Awesome. Thank you. So that brings us to a close here for this discussion. Daniel and Josh, thank you both so much for sharing your insights here and your strategies to modernize the mission with FormAssembly. FormAssembly allows organizations to manage compliant data collection that's locked down but not slowed down. With FormAssembly, you get security without compromise, FedRAMP High and DoD IL4 baked in. Rapid modernization allows you to replace legacy paper processes in days, not months, using a low-code environment, and data integrity eliminates siloed data by piping information directly into Salesforce or other critical systems. If you're interested in scheduling time with FormAssembly to discuss your mission's data requirements and challenges, please visit formassembly.com and schedule a personalized demo. Thank you again to FormAssembly for underwriting this program, and thank you to our viewers for tuning in. For GovExec, I'm Shay Connolly. See you next time.
Thank you very much.